Yes, thank you very much for coming on. Should we start by you just telling us who you are and what you do and where you are?
Yes, of course. My name's Chris Chambers. I'm 48 years old. I'm currently living in West Dorset. I'm a professional helicopter pilot. I currently work for the National Police Air Service. And I've been doing that job for about 4 years now. But prior to that, I was a helicopter pilot in the Royal Navy.
Fantastic. So we usually start by asking two very basic questions. What did your parents do, and what did you want to do when you were a child?
Okay. So my parents, I grew up in a town called Wolverton in North Buckinghamshire, not far from Northamptonshire, and that's the area where my mum and dad are from. My dad trained as a toolmaker, working in the automotive industry. That was before I was born, but when I was growing up, my dad was self-employed in 2 or 3 different businesses, initially starting out with a partner working or owning and selling motorcycles, and also kind of related bits and pieces, really, sort of petrol filling station, motor vehicle repairs, and so on. And then he sort of moved from that into running his own business, fitting tow bars to cars, making trailers and all that sort of stuff, that kind of industry, really. And then my mum was, when I was a kid, she was a housewife. But when we all went to university and left home, or whilst we were in the process of sort of migrating out of home, she went back to school, got A-levels and then a degree and then a PhD eventually, and then ended up working for Buckinghamshire Council in social services, support services for people in that kind of world. So yeah, that's their background. So no military connections at all, really, no military influences. But I was mad keen to be a pilot in the Royal Air Force. Actually, I wanted to be a fast jet pilot. That was my burning ambition. Okay. And from about go on.
Where did that come from then?
I don't really know. I mean, my grandparents, they lived out in the countryside, and whenever I would go and stay there during the week, there were always fast jets flying over, military jets doing low-level flying exercises. They'd just be zooming over their house, and I can remember thinking that was absolutely thrilling. You'd hear them coming from miles away. And think, well, I'd go running out to the garden and try and see them. So that, I think, was probably an influence, but I don't know really. It just no one suggested it, no one pushed it on to me. It was just something that I kind of wanted to do. So I started getting books and magazines. I was about age 11 or 12, books and magazines, and kind of learning all these airplanes and all the history of the Air Force. And I really got into it. And then my mum, she said, well, you could join the Air Cadets. And I'd never heard of this. This is the Air Training Corps. So I thought, great, I want to do that. And it turned out there was a unit just down the road from where I lived, but you couldn't join till you were 13. So, and I was 12. So I can remember saying to my mum, right, let's put a date in the diary. So just, 2 days after my 13th birthday, Monday, the 9th of May, 1988, I, went down to the Air Training Corps unit and joined. And I think I went every Monday and Thursday until I went to university at the age of 18. And that was just a superb sort of organization, a great sort of introduction into all things kind of aviation. It got me flying in Chipmunk, airplanes, and I eventually got sponsorship through the Air Force as a result of probably my enthusiasm, which was all fired up via the cadets. Yeah,
fantastic. So you wanted to go to the RAF first. So
yes.
What did you join, or what happened? Still painful.
I had a really interesting, because I was so keen, and I got sponsorship from the Air Force through the 6th form. So I got a 6th form scholarship, which gave me, or strictly speaking, gave my mum and dad £1,000 a year to what that money was designed for. I don't really know, but got that. But more importantly to me was it also got me a flying scholarship as well. So that was 30 hours of flying at a local flying club funded by the Air Force. So I did that at Kidlington near Oxford, summer 1991, I think. So the whole of August for 4 weeks, I was there with a bunch of other guys learning to sort of fly at the age of I just turned 17 actually. So that's kind of how that started. So I was kind of like, and the sponsorship, the sixth form scholarship, that gave me a place at RAF Cranwell. So to my mind, I was in, I was kind of home and dry, naively, stupidly, foolishly thinking that. Anyway, 1991, there was also a famous round of career cuts, of defence cuts, sorry, called Options for Change. And one of the things they axed were all the sponsored sixth formers that were going to be going into the Air Force. They pretty much they kept 2 or 3, like the real sharp, bright ones, but the duffers who didn't do very well with it in their A levels, which that was me. They binned them all off. So I was kind of back to square one really, and so I went to university, which I hadn't planned to do. I applied through clearing, I think it was, got a place at Bristol, University West of England, but the old Bristol Polytechnic, and I applied for the Air Force several more times, but I didn't get in, and I eventually got a letter. I think on my 4th application, I got a letter back from them saying you've been for selection 3 times now, and you're not being called back again. And I think the final sentence was, don't call us, stop. This is not going to happen.
Well, no.
So that was I obviously gutted. And went off. I finished university. I went to work for John Lewis. Actually, I got a job as a trainee manager at Brent Cross Shopping Centre. Wow. Working as a trainee manager, standing on the shop floor in the toy department, which actually was quite good fun. I was the only gender shouldn't matter, but I was the only bloke working in the toy department, and I found it quite good fun. And anything technical that needed assembling or building or fixing, I was the go-to guy. So I quite enjoyed doing that. And sometimes it involved getting in a John Lewis van to go and visit some person who was failing to put up a trampoline or whatever in their garden in North London somewhere. So I quite enjoyed that. But on the whole, it drove me nuts. It was not for me. And I can remember one Friday, I think I was due to finish early on a Friday or something, and I thought, I'm going to go to the careers office, the Royal Navy careers office. They fly, and I had never considered joining either the Navy or the Army, but I went to the Navy careers office, walked in the door, said, I'm fed up with this, any chance I can apply to be a pilot? And the careers officer there said, yeah, by all means, clearly I can see you've got the ambition, but you know nothing about the Navy, because he'd give me a little mini interview and I knew nothing about ships or Navy aircraft or anything. And it was he sort of waved his finger at me and said, yeah, I'm going to put you forward, but you better learn, know your stuff when you turn up for the interviews, because, you're not going to...
Pointy end is the front, right?
Yeah, all that. So I then had to, I think the application process was quite quick, but I think around about 2 or 3 months until I went for the interview and the selection process. So I just filled my time learning all about ships and ships radars and all that sort of stuff, which was
what to do with a drunken sailor.
Yeah. Which actually is quite a useful skill, actually, as it turns out. And then went for what they call the Admiralty Interview Board, which is a 3-day selection process down at HMS Sultan in Portsmouth. And because I'd been so disappointed with the whole Air Force thing, and I just assumed I would get nowhere with the Navy as well. It was that thing of, I don't really care. I'll just see what happens, I suppose. And I got in. So
well done.
Yeah. So
Fantastic.
1998 started at Britannia Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, and was in the Navy for 16 years.
Wow.
So I forgot what the actual original question was.
No, that's great. Tell us about then those 3 days that got you in. What did that, do you remember? What did that consist of?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the selection process was very similar to what I'd already done with the Air Force. So a lot of emphasis initially on, what did we do? Day one, I think, was a lot of academic-y type stuff. So there were written tests to do. There were general knowledge quizzes. There were, I can remember we had to write I can remember they remarked in my final report that I'd done very well on the précis exercise. So they give you like an A4 piece of paper of just text, a report of something. I can't remember what it was about. But the exercise was to précis it down to as short as possible, and stuff like that. So it was a day of that those sorts of kind of things, really. And then an interview, for 50-minute, hour-long kind of interview with 3 senior officers. One was an aviator, because that was the branch that I was applying for. One was a senior generalist kind of officer, and there was also a French exchange guy there as well, which I can remember feeling a bit embarrassed about that, because I don't know how the conversation got onto French impressionist painters of the late, I was like, oh my God, why am I talking about this with a French officer in the room? I can remember, he probably knew nothing anyway, but so there was that. And then once all that was done, we then had a day of exercises in a hangar with barrels and planks and rope, and it's the old, right, okay, you've got a team of 5 people, and that's that area there, that's shark infested custard, you can't fall in there, but you've got to bridge the gap with a rope and a plank and a barrel and blah blah blah. So there were all those kind of leadership exercises that we had to do, and actually that's very similar to what that I'd done for the Air Force, actually. So it was all fairly straightforward. I think probably what got me in was the Navy just they've got a different mindset, different mentality. Not better, not worse. It's just a different culture. It's subtle, it's nuanced, but there's a different type of character, I think. And I think that probably, having already been to university, already worked for a little bit, and also probably having had learned from my experiences with applying for the Air Force, I think it was just all those things just came together at the right time, and that was that. Yeah.
So you went to Dartmouth. How long was that for then? That's to teach you to fly, or to teach you to be a naval officer?
So this is the whole thing about being in the military, is that there's actually quite a long path to get to where you want to actually be in the end. So the first stage was a year at Dartmouth, which is officer training. So the first couple of months is all the military nonsense that everyone kind of stereotypically understands. Is all the marching and being on a parade ground and polishing your boots and running across Dartmoor and all that sort of.
Did you have to do escape and evasion stuff where people are out with dogs trying to find you?
Yes, did a couple of those. The first one, and the big one really for the Navy, was 10-day exercise in the New Forest, Hampshire, bit of sort of moorland and stuff around that way. 6 days of survival training in the field, and not a lot of food. Although it was instruction at that stage. There was very little food that we were given. I think we were given a live chicken on day 3, and then I think on the 4th day we were given some fish or something that supposedly had been caught from the stream, but that's all. I think it was all bullshit. I think they just got that from the fishmonger somewhere, to make us think that there would be fish in the river. So of course we go and try and find, or to do fishing, and of course catch nothing at all. So there was that for 6 days, and then we then go the sort of day 7, 8, 9, 10. After that was on the run. So we left our camp behind, and we had to navigate from across to different places over those 4 days. But by then we were pretty starved. I mean, we were noticeably, lost weight and lethargic and so on. And of course, the funny thing was, everyone tried to have, arrangements with people. Right, okay, on day 5, I'll meet you. The people who are not on the survival exercise, that day 5, I'll meet you at this tree, at this good reference, and you hand over a stash of Mars bars and all that sort of stuff. So that sort of thing was very closely policed, if you like, by the instructors and staff. And if you got caught, that was it. You were off, and you would do the course again. Yeah, you'd be back coursed if you did that. And there were a few people who tried it. There were a few people who got away with it. There were a few people who didn't, and of course they end up doing the exercise twice, which is not nice. But no, so then 4 days on the run, and on the final day you have to get to a particular point. Of course, you get caught because they all know they funnel you down a particular route or whatever. You get caught, and there's dogs sniffing you out and all that sort of stuff. And then at that stage, you're then blindfolded and chucked onto a truck, and then shit gets real, so to speak. Because
Really?
you're then taken off for 24 hours of interrogation, and you're put in. I mean, whether they still do it or not, I don't know. But we were put in stress positions and blindfolded, and you'd be in a stress position thinking what's going on. You'd be there waiting for what seemed like ages, and all of a sudden 2 people would grab you, run you off somewhere. I mean, we had no idea where we were. I later found out we were in some of the old sort of fort buildings around Portsmouth. The military still own. They've got those all kitted out as sort of dank, dark places to interrogate people.
Dungeon.
So, yeah. So, and then you'd be sat down in a room. Then the blindfold would come off, and it's like all of a sudden there's an interrogator there, and you're trained to say, the name, rank, number, whatever it is, say nothing more. And they can't beat you up, of course. They can't do that at all, but they do everything else. But,
Right.
So shouting at you in your face, they strip you naked in front of, so of course that when you get stripped naked, it's a female interrogator that you're in front of. So that's supposed to be degrading. But by that time, you just don't care. You're just whatever. So you get 24 hours of that sort of stuff. And then get game over. So that was, I mean, when I was saying earlier, it's just a game, just go with the flow. Actually 10 days of being starved and that sort of stuff, it's quite difficult to maintain it's just a game.
Yeah.
On the sort of evasion part, on those 4 days, we had people hallucinating, and I had an odd experience, not too extreme, but I can remember we had to carry these packs, and they were actually flying overalls. And what they'd done is they taught us to tie the arms and the legs together to make a couple of makeshifts arm straps, so you could wear this sort of little makeshift pack on your back, like a rucksack, and you'd unzip the main part of the overall. You could put stuff in there. And I was walking across these fields on day 9 or whatever, and this thing kept wanting to fall off my shoulders, and I kept putting it back on, sort of trying to drag it back over my shoulder. I was doing this all night, it felt like. And then at one stage, I then suddenly realised, I don't know where my pack's gone. I lost it. Everything that was in it was gone, but I had still, for some reason, imagined it was on my shoulders and imagined it had been an inconvenience. It was really bizarre. There was another guy that was having sort of all sorts of hallucinations and stuff. Yeah, it was pretty tough. The only thing we didn't do is we never fired a weapon. I've never fired in the Navy. Really? I mean, I have done a little bit, much further on down the line, but I never, in any of my general work, have I carried any kind of rifle, pistol, weapon or anything like that at all. So there was none of that sort of stuff that people might imagine you doing in the military. In fact, actually, because it's the Navy, there was a lot of boat work. So you go down the steps from the college, which is up on the hill. You wind your way down the steps down to a quayside, which is all within the sort of the college grounds. And they had quite a few sort of diesel twin engine sort of boats, which we did a lot of work on those, just like sailing around in the Dart estuary, doing exercise, going around buoys or learning to come alongside or dropping an anchor and all that sort of stuff, which of course for someone who just wants to fly, this is just total nonsense. But it becomes quite a good game because you're with you get to know who the other aviators are as well, so you're all there, you're just having a laugh, kind of perplexed. It is just a game. It's just a case of ticking the boxes and jumping through those hoops and doing all that general seamanship training and all that sort of stuff, at Dartmouth. So you get a sort of year really of doing kind of all that bullshit, frankly. And then once Dartmouth's over, you then graduate as an officer in the Royal Navy, and there's a passing out parade and all that sort of stuff. And that that is an achievement. I don't want to be too glib. I was quite proud of them. And the one,
sure,
I've only got 1 or 2 sort of bits of memorabilia up in my house, but one of them is a photo of me, my graduation day at Dartmouth. I'm quite quite proud of that, really. And also the other one I've got up on the wall is my commissioning certificate. So which is nothing. Neither of those are really related to aviation, but it's quite an achievement. Very, very happy and proud to have done that.
Tell me about the work you've done. Have you had lots of fun cleaning toilets in Uruguay? Tell us about the jobs you've had. Were they good or were they bad? It's all a waste of time. I'm gonna cry. Have you ever worked in bars, killing cows in abattoirs? Joined the RAF and learned to fly. Have you ever played guitar, driven soul or mended cars? It's all a waste of time and then you die.
So yeah, a year at Dartmouth, and then into flying training. Now, it would be nice if I could just conveniently say that flying training was a course, and then I finished it, and that was that. But it's not. I had to wait for an elementary flying training course to start. So I finished in January 99. Didn't finish Dartmouth in January 99. Flying training couldn't start until about September 99. So I had a period of what's known as holdover. Where you're basically waiting. Now, this is actually where you can have a lot of fun because you've got no responsibilities and no one's really expecting anything of you either. So we were allowed to place ourselves on squadrons, units or ships that we wanted to be on. And if they could accommodate us and within reason, we were allowed to go and do that. So one of the first things I did, I went back to Southampton University Air Squadron because I just knew some people there and it was a university. So, but they need a few full-time officers there to help run things. So basically I had a month or so back spending time with university students, sort of just having a laugh basically. Then from there I went and spent a month with an RAF squadron, fast jet squadron up in Yorkshire, flying around in a Hawk as a passenger in a fast jet, just going along for the ride, which is great fun. And then from there, what happened there? Oh, then the fun stopped a little bit because then the Navy said, right, we are going to place you on HMS Invincible because the 800 squadron, which is a Sea Harrier squadron, they wanted someone to help with dog's body administration and photocopying and making their tea and those sorts of things. So I went and embarked on HMS Invincible as a holdover, but even then that was good fun because you got no responsibilities. And then from there, I then got a phone call on the ship via a satellite phone, and I thought someone was pulling my leg. I got a phone call from the guy that looked after all the holdover officers. He said, "I need someone to go to Australia, to Sydney, to help set up a defence, what they call a defence industry day. This is where the UK MOD host, an industry day somewhere around the world to help industry, network together."
Yeah.
And I honestly thought it was a mate pulling my leg because being on board HMS Invincible, it was during the Kosovo crisis as well, so there were no runs ashore. There was not really much fun happening. And I thought someone's pulling my leg, But anyway, I got flown off the ship, taken back to the UK, put on a flight to Sydney, given a nice hotel and a hire car, and told to basically organise a marquee, which was that was it. That was pretty much my brief. There were a few other bits and pieces involved. So yeah, I mean, this could be a very long conversation if I talk through every sort of little job that I've done like that. But that kind of gives you a flavour of the sorts of other stuff that you kind of get involved in. Incredible. And then elementary flying training started after that in sort of August 99 on a light aircraft. And then that's when my sort of flying training kind of started, really.
Right.
Fixed wing flying training. And
does everyone in that boat, no pun intended, everyone in that position who wants to fly, I'm guessing, but I could be completely wrong, everyone wants to fly fast jets. No one goes in, or do some people want to fly? How do they decide you're going to fly helicopters, you're going to fly jets or whatever?
It's a good question because actually I assumed everyone would be like me, would want to fly fast jets. So going into the Navy, I wanted to fly Sea Harrier. That was clearly what I was going to go for. But actually there were not many, but there were a few people that were dead keen on helicopters. They loved helicopters. Or sometimes there's the family connection. It's like, oh, my dad was an Army Air Corps helicopter pilot, so I want to be a Navy helicopter pilot, although whatever, but that's that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, most people wanted to go down the fast jet route. And you get streamed at the end of elementary flying training. So this is the first flying training course that I started in August 99, for 6 months, flying up on a light aircraft, and for 6 months or so. And at the end of that course, you finish, and the best guy or the best couple of guys on that course, which is normally sort of anywhere between sort of 8 or 12 people, perhaps, best couple of guys would then get streamed to go down the fast jet route and then go on to basic fast jet training, which I was one of those, which was great. So I'm on the path now that I want to be on. I'm thinking, great, basic fast jet training. Here I go. So then it was a year at RAF Linton-on-Ouse flying a basic fast jet trainer called the Tucano, which is actually a turboprop engine aircraft, but it was still pretty fast, sort of 240 knots, and a nice aircraft to fly solo when there's not an instructor with you. You can have a lot of fun with it, but when there's an instructor, making you work hard, it was a hard aircraft to fly accurately, I found, and that was my downfall in the end. I could never really properly get the aircraft to do what I wanted it to do. I was always a little bit behind the curve on it. And I was just not cutting it really. So after 13 months, although I completed the course, they said, Chris, sorry, this is not for you. We're going to recommend you back onto helicopters. So that's where the helicopter journey started. So I was needless to say, disappointed, but I was also, by that stage, I had realised I had given it my all. I mean, I really had worked hard to try and overcome it, but I took it too lightly. When I first started, I didn't give it the full attention and the full focus that it deserved. I was still in party mode. I'd had a fairly easy time through elementary flying training because I could already fly. I'd already been sponsored. Years earlier, I'd already flown aircraft and all that sort of thing. So doing the elementary flying training was fairly straightforward. But so I didn't. I think if I'd started basic fast jet training with a more serious attitude and done the work. I mean, these are all the sorts of mature things that a grown-up tells you, aren't they? But at the time, that was it was my own. I made my own downfall, I think, really, in that respect. But it didn't matter because I then went on to helicopters, and I would just fast forwarding to now, I wouldn't change any of it. I'm so glad I went down the route that I did.
Yeah, so you end up somewhere, don't you? And if you're happy where you end up in the end.
Completely.
It almost feels like it was meant to be, doesn't it? That's how
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you ended up helicopter. Is it? Yeah. Sorry, it's some extremely basic and very dumb questions.
No, go for it. They're the best questions.
It's obviously, God, it's obviously very different flying a helicopter to flying a plane, right?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So, yes, flying the helicopter or flying the aircraft is different, but the aviation environment that you're in is the same. And actually, there's more to learn in the outside environment, really, than there is with the aircraft. I mean, obviously, learning to fly initially, yes, it's all about coordinating the controls and getting the aircraft to do what you want it to do and flying it accurately and understanding all the systems and being able to, use the radio and know what to do in the event of emergencies and malfunctions and all those sorts of things. So that's all the sort of hands-on flying. But actually, arguably, the bigger challenge is building your, what we call airmanship, your awareness of what's going on in the outside world. What are other aircraft doing? Where are you in the world? What controlled airspace do you have around you? What airspace do you have to avoid? Navigating from A to B, you might be flying what we call VFR, so visually using visual references in the outside world, or you might be flying what we call IFR, instrument flight rules. So actually you're having to fly using radio aids and navigational sort of systems and so on. Actually, there's not much difference between doing that in a conventional airplane to doing those in a helicopter. So yes and no. It's different flying, but there's a lot of stuff that you can already do. Or from my situation, going from fixed wing into helicopters, there was a lot of stuff that I was already could do. Yeah.
And were there other people in your position similar, from a similar background? And they'd all been in the either the Air Force or Navy cadets, and they'd all learned to fly. And they'd
Yeah, do you
all
know what? I always used to think to myself, one of the things I loved about the Navy, I used to love understanding people's different backgrounds, because people had come from all sorts of different places. There were quite a few people like me, I suppose, gone to school, gone to university, wanted to be pilots, so joined the military. And then the other type are, there's people that don't necessarily want to be in the military, but they're there because that's their kind of family tradition. And that's kind of that sort of background.
right.
But then there were other people who'd already worked. So there was one guy who'd worked on oil rigs. He was his training was, some kind of geo whatever type of degree, and then he'd gone from that into working on oil rigs, and he'd done that for 5 years, and then decided that he was a bit fed up of it, so he thought, I'll join the Navy. I can't remember now, but there were people from various different backgrounds, and I think that was what was quite nice. It was quite a diverse sort of set of people, really.
So you made it through. You became a helicopter pilot.
Yes. So if you just sort of fast forward through, I suppose, helicopter flying training, I got at the end of helicopter flying training, there's another streaming process to decide which type of helicopter you're going to go and fly. I got streamed onto Lynx Mark III, which is the helicopter that is flown off the back of frigates and destroyers. So I again, didn't get what I wanted, but I suppose this is a compliment. I wanted to be on a carrier. Again, this is going back to the social. Where's the party? Where's the alcohol being drunk? Where's the party? Who's having fun? That was so. I wanted to be on an aircraft carrier with a large, squadron, but I wasn't given that. So I was given Lynx, which is the aircraft they fly off the backs of frigates and destroyers. So just one aircraft, one flight deck on the back of the ship. One aircraft, one pilot, and what we call an observer, who is actually the name sort of undersells it a little bit. The observer is the sort of tactical and weapons operator, because the Lynx was a maritime attack helicopter. So basically two crew, and actually that was just so much fun because you had the aircraft. When we deployed at sea. The aircraft, I was the only guy on the ship that could fly the aircraft, so it felt like it was kind of mine, which was nice. The observer was the other member of aircrew, so at sea it was quite fairly straightforward and very sober, all sort of eating and working together. It was quite a night. You got to know people pretty well. It was a nice club of people, and then you get alongside somewhere for 5 days and let your hair down, and it was not quite sure how much I should give away, but there's a lot, it was a lot of fun. And if people were to ask me about my time being a helicopter pilot in the Navy, I wouldn't really talk too much about flying. I'd talk about all the sort of runs ashore and ports and drinking and all that sort of stuff.
Give us your top three on shore, shore leave.
Yeah, well, no, let's start with the top three. Okay, just trying to think. Okay, so let's go with number 3.
I like it. Reverse order. Very good.
Yeah, Amsterdam. So this is quite early on, actually.
What happens there? I've never heard of Amsterdam.
No, yeah, it's very boring there. So actually, I went to Amsterdam 2 or 3 times because it's a fairly quick run from the UK over the Channel and then up whichever. I should know. Never took much notice, but you get into Amsterdam on a ship, you go alongside. Just lots of fun because it's all, everything that a sailor wants. Say no more is in Amsterdam. So there's a lot, and I'm just being observational about my colleagues at this stage. So Amsterdam, good fun. Then after that, New Orleans. I was on board. We were doing counter-drug operations in the Caribbean. So we were alongside in New Orleans for 5 days, and just a fantastically great, fun place. For me, music being a passion of mine, and then also, again, that thing of having fun with your mates. So that was great. But I think the best run ashore, just for sheer chaos, really, I suppose, was Murmansk in northern Russia.
Okay.
So we've been doing what they call Baltic operations, which is like a sort of a fairly standard patrol that the Navy do in the Baltic. But before we went into the Baltic, we were going up the west side of Norway, up the North Sea, and then into the Arctic Circle, around the top, down through, I think it's called the Kola Straits, and then alongside in Murmansk. And this was May, but it was still cold and lots of snow, well, a fair bit of snow and frost and that sort of stuff. But a real experience. We were up there. It was the anniversary, I think, of the last of the Russian convoys. So it was a big anniversary. So we were up there for sort of a commemorative thing. Prince Andrew was there at one stage as well, so we met him. But we were there for five days, and funny place, Russia. I mean, for a start, Arctic Circle, so it was daylight pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
It got a little bit dusk, but basically it was light all 24 hours a day. So that's very confusing when you're, for drunken sailors to orientate themselves and remember what's what when. Literally, it was like, is this 5 o'clock in the morning or is this 5 o'clock in the afternoon? I really can't remember. But the most hilarious thing was we got invited to a vodka toasting party. So this is the Russian Navy, and we were driven by coach into, I think it was called Severomorsk, which is a sort of Russian naval port. Through, I mean, it all felt like James Bond type stuff. Okay. And we were invited in for this vodka toasting party. And before we went, our supply officer, one of the officers in the wardroom, said, "Right, guys, I've done this before. What you need to do is eat the fatty meat, okay? Otherwise, you're not going to last, okay?" And so we were like, "Eat the fatty meat? What do you mean?" He said, "Don't worry, you'll see when we get there." So we're into this vodka toasting party, and there's this big hall, and there were some French officers there as well. But there's, I don't know, probably 20-odd tables, no chairs. And the tables are all loaded up with plates of food, and you can't really identify what it is, but there is fatty meat on there, as well as other nibbles and bits and pieces. And the event starts, and it all starts. Obviously, we're all sober at this stage, so it starts with a few sort of formal toasts, and it's a sailor comes around, he fills up your little vodka glass, and you're waiting to make your toast, and toast is made, and down they go. And the advice was, if you neck it, that's the way you're going to have to drink for the rest of the evening. If you sip it, that's acceptable, but that's the way. So we were like, we'll just neck these vodkas down. So then the sailor boy comes along and fills up your glass again, and there's a sort of 10 minutes of chit chat, and then someone else makes a toast. And then the evening just goes on like this, and we are absolutely trousered. The Royal Navy guys were absolutely mortaled. The French were not doing much better. The Russians all seem to be very bemused by this, because this is clearly for them, hilarious, and they can hold their drink. I decide to by this stage that I'm gonna. Do you remember the dance that David Brent's dance from The Office? He does that funny. I start doing that, and the Russians are all looking at me thinking, "What is this guy doing?" And anyway, by close to the end of the evening, I'm feeling very sick, and I'm thinking, "Shit, I'm gonna throw up." I need to go, so I need to go and find a lavatory, and I step out of this hall. It's like there were no signs to say where lavatories are, so I'm sort of going around these corridors. I'm thinking, there's no way I can hold this. So I'm in my number one tunic, my best uniform, and the only thing I can find to throw up in is my own sleeve. So I'm opening up the sleeve of my tunic, vomiting in there, thinking, "Oh God, right, I'll just hold that, and then eventually find a toilet." Anyway, absolutely. And then we all, at the end of the evening, we all get put onto a coach and taken out. And again, it's still daylight. It's 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. Coach breaks down on some lonely hill. So we then all pile out this coach and start walking back and we were just all over the place. And then the next day, we all wake up at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever it was. And no one's got hangovers. It's like, guys, what happened? We're all part of some kind of collective kind of odd dream or something. But it was just hilarious. There was all sorts of stuff going on in Murmansk and Russia, which was very, very memorable.
I'm sure you represented Her Majesty's Navy very, very well. That's just
Yes,
gave
very well.
a great
Very well.
impression to the
Yeah.
Russians.
I know exactly. I entertained and I improvised, and I did everything that was expected.
Fantastic.
No man's putting it on yet. 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 But I was going for a minute.
So you spent 15, 16 years, you say, in the Navy.
Yeah.
What percentage of that would be away at sea, and how much time back in the UK?
So once I'd got all that fun out of my system, actually, the thing that I really wanted to do was instruct. That was a strong kind of ambition for me, was to become an instructor. So in the first 2 years that I was sort of flying Lynx, I went away. I was quite lucky in the sense that I didn't do a long 6, 7, 8 month deployment, So I never, that they are tough. The people that do those out to the Gulf, away from homes and families for a long time, that's quite tough. And I'm glad that I didn't ever have to do that, because I think I would have struggled with that. But no, to answer your question, the longest I did was around about 2 or 3 months at any one time. But in 2 years, I guess I spent 8 or 9 months away, I suppose, which is not too arduous by some standards. But after that 2 years, I then got a job within the Navy teaching within the simulator, the Lynx simulator, so full-time simulator instructor. I kept my hand in with flying, but my primary role was then instructing, which I was very happy to do. A lot of people would think the sort of simulator job's quite boring. For me, it wasn't. I learned a hell of a lot doing it. I got to, I saw pretty much every pilot, every crew in the Royal Navy that flew Lynx, or Lynx Mark 3, Lynx Mark 8, came through the simulator, and I got to see them operate, which was great, because it wasn't just training new recruits or new trainees. You were also doing continuity training for existing pilots. Right. So I found that all really fascinating. We had, there'd be test pilots that would come and use it as well, or there'd be international students who fly Lynx, in their country. They'd come and use the simulator. So you got to meet and sort of meet these interesting people and have a sort of slightly broader experience, really. And then from the simulator, I then went on and trained as a flying instructor, which is quite a sort of privileged, might be the wrong word. I can't think what the right word is, but not everyone gets to do that. You've got to be selected to do that and be seen as being suitable to be an instructor. It's quite a coveted kind of thing, I suppose. So I did 6 months training as an instructor up at Shawbury, which is a combined services course, Royal Navy, Army and Air Force. And then once I'd finished that course, I then got sent back down to Yeovilton, which is where I had been based, to then teach students to fly the Lynx helicopter. So they'd already done helicopter training. Now they were then specialising on the Lynx, and I was one of the instructors teaching them.
So how can I phrase this? The job is flying, right? Yeah. Is that the main bit that you love? Is it basically you're just waiting all day to get in the aircraft and fly, and everything else is a bit of a distraction? Or are there other parts of the job you love, and sometimes flying is a bit of a, not going to say chore, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
I do.
All about the flying, and everything else is, I think. Or?
Yeah. So for a lot of people, I'd say what you're getting at is very true. It's about flying, and everything else is a pain in the backside. I want to go flying. Why can't I go flying? Because the ship is doing such and such, or the ship's not, blah blah blah. But we need to go flying because we need to maintain our currency. Well, yeah, but you can't, because we've got to do this first. We've got to do that, and the flight deck's needed for PT, or the flight deck's needed, or we got such and such exercise. We can't get the aircraft out of the hangar, or whatever. So I'm probably just a bit more open and easygoing than that. I was never that fussed about if we didn't fly. I mean, I wouldn't have been in the Navy if I couldn't fly, full stop. That was my role. But on a day-to-day basis, deployed, if we couldn't fly because there was some other reason, then fine, whatever, and if I wasn't flying, then I didn't really have, I would have, I can't even remember what they are. I would have had a few trivial kind of secondary roles, perhaps, organizing some social stuff, or perhaps being responsible for some, excursion at the next port of call or whatever it might be. But basically, if we weren't flying, I didn't have much to do. So there might be a fair bit of watching DVDs or reading books or that sort of thing. But generally speaking, we would fly most days that we were at sea. And also, it also depends on whether you're on actual operations or not. So when we were in the Caribbean, we were there on a counter-drugs patrol. So we were flying twice a day routinely. And that was pretty much for the 3 months that we were out there. But that was also interspersed with, visits alongside, which the ship has to do for replenishing and rest, recuperation, and all that sort of stuff. So, but no, there were definitely guys who were very much all about, it's, if I can't fly, then I'm getting really fed up.
Yeah,
that was never me.
So you talked about some very demanding flying. Could you recall any particularly hairy scenarios?
Yeah. Every time I tried to land at night on the flight deck, pretty much. It is. I mean, it's until you see it, it's difficult to comprehend. At night, at sea, there is no cultural. There's no lighting at all. From obviously, we're very used to when at home, even on a dark night. Quite often you've got light pollution from cities and towns and all that sort of stuff. At sea, there's none of that at all. Mm-hmm. And then if there's no moon, there is actually no light. It is properly dark, to the point where you can't really even see the horizon. And we didn't, this was before my sort of squadron or my units got night vision goggles. So we didn't have MVG at this time. But we still had to fly at night. So you'd take off, get airborne from the ship. The flight deck's only 14 feet above the sea. So you lift into the hover, do some checks above the flight deck, make sure all the systems are correct, and then move off to the left and then transition away. And as soon as you lose visual references with the ship, on a dark night, there's nothing out there to look at. So you're basically straight onto your flight instruments, making sure you've got a positive rate of climb, making sure your wings are level, making sure that you're accelerating, and then getting up to a safe height to operate at, and so on. There's also on this aircraft, there's no autopilot. In a modern aircraft, although it might be called an autopilot, actually the autopilot does more than just fly the aircraft for you. If it's not, basically an autopilot will hold heights and hold headings for you and hold speeds for you. So we had none of that in the Lynx. So you had to be hands-on flying that aircraft all the time. So that's fine. You could get airborne. And then once everything's settled down, the observer then turns on his radar and then starts using the radar to do whatever job we're going to do. Generally speaking, that's looking for other ships at sea. And if it's a tactical kind of training exercise, you're looking for other ships and you're going to pretend that they're the enemy, or they might, if it's actually an exercise with other ships, they are, for the purposes of the exercise, the enemy. So you're then in a tactical situation where you're trying to find out where they are, report back to the ship, and then come up with some kind of attack solution, whether that's missiles or providing targeting information for the ship or whatever it might be, or ships. So you're doing all that sort of stuff at night, and often not able to see much out there. But then the most demanding bit is then coming back to land on the ship. You're then in a tactical environment, so none of the ships have got lights on because they don't want to give away their positions. So you then using the radar or the helicopter's radar, which, because the Lynx had its own little built-in radar system, we'd use that to then position ourselves on an approach back to the flight deck of the ship. And then I can't remember what it would be now, about a mile and a half now, I think it would be. We then start the descent down to the flight deck, reducing speed to then come alongside. If you imagine that the flight deck is at the back of the ship, my aim is to come alongside in a hover on the port side of the flight deck. So I'm looking out the right-hand window, doing the same speed as the ship. So i.e. I'm stationary relative to the ship, regardless of what the ship's actually doing through the water, get sail stable alongside the ship, and then move to the right, position over the top of the flight deck and land on, all in the dark. And actually, we do have a landing lamp, so a steerable landing lamp on the aircraft, which I can then direct towards the ship to start giving me some visual references. And the ship will also have a couple of red masthead lights. They're normally on, and it might have a stern light on as well. So there's a little bit to look at, but really demanding, and if you've got a sea state, so the ship's pitching and rolling as well, you've got to make sure that you pick your moment to then land on when the ship is relatively stationary, so that you get an accurate landing. And then as soon as you land, activate something called the harpoon. It was just basically a device that came out underneath the aircraft, and it grabbed hold of a metal mesh that was built into the flight deck. And it grabbed hold of that to keep the aircraft secure on the ship. And then once the harpoon was in, the flight deck team would come out with the straps and lashings and lash the aircraft to the flight deck. So all that sort of stuff, all that stuff low level at night around the flight deck was hard. The other thing, it was demanding as well. Sometimes you'd have to do a what we call a replenishment at sea, or load lifting, where you might have to go and pick someone up from a ship that doesn't have a flight deck, or you might need to drop something off on a ship that doesn't have a flight deck, so you can't land. And lots of ships are very cluttered; they don't have a lot of space, so you've got to find somewhere to actually drop your guy down, and that might be on the bow of the ship, for example. But the ship's got to maintain speed, so and the wind might be from starboard. So I need to be pointing into wind. Therefore, I'm a beam across the ship, if you like, across the bow, flying sideways at 20 knots to make sure that I'm staying stationary relative to the ship. Again, might be doing all of that at night. So that was really demanding stuff, and it was not something that I enjoyed or relished doing at all.
Presumably it's always terrifying.
Yes Genuinely. I mean, it's
was it ever too rough to even attempt, to go out and try and land again?
Yes sometimes. Well, quite not, I wouldn't say quite frequently. It wouldn't be unusual for wind to be out of limits. So depending on, it starts getting into a bit of technical detail now, but depending on the weight of the aircraft, how much fuel you were carrying, depending on the wind direction, the turbulence created by the wind around the superstructure of the ship might be out limits potentially for the aircraft to get airborne. So that you might have to wait for the wind to calm down, or wait for the ship to change direction, which affects the wind direction across the ship, and so on. So it could, yes, the weather, wind, sea state, always a factor to consider.
Should we talk about what when it came to an end? Then you decided to leave the Navy, or you were court-martialed and drummed out?
Well, yeah. Funnily enough, despite me, I loved it, and I got I got all just happy memories, no regrets at all. Glad the way it all worked out, But I was also I knew that I wanted to leave, and I deliberately didn't. When each time you have an annual report, your annual appraisal, you tick a box as to whether you're a volunteer for further service or not. Now, at the time, I was on a 16-year career. If I had ticked that box, I probably would have carried on. I probably would have got selected for further service, which would have meant promotion and more job available, job opportunities. But I knew if I ticked that box, I'd end up staying, because it would be kind of too sort of easy, if you like. But I knew that I wanted to go off and do something else. So I deliberately didn't tick that box to force myself to kind of go. So 16 years. So that takes us up to the end of 2013. I left the Navy. But I was really keen to go by then because I had already planned, I wanted to run my own business. I wanted to leave flying. And I started a property management and lettings business, actually, here in, actually South Somerset, based the office is in Yeovil. And the idea was that I would do property management and lettings for people in the armed forces. A lot of people in the armed forces, obviously, they have a family home in this area where I live, but they get deployed away or they go on an exchange to another country for a couple of years. So they want to let out their home. So I set up a business doing that, and I did all of the sort of qualifications and accreditations and all the bits and pieces that you need. And it wasn't the roaring success I thought it would be, but it did grow steadily and consistently for several years. And I ended up employing people and with an office of 5 people in Yeovil. And that occupied all of my time. And that thing, small business owners, that thing of being completely immersed in your business is absolutely true. It just completely consumed me. I enjoyed it, but also you have to work hard, especially in those early years. You get a client who wants a consultation or whatever on a Saturday morning, and you think, oh shucks, I was going to keep that weekend clear, but you think, well, I don't want to lose the client, so you end up going out and doing it, or evenings and so on. So it started a small but fairly busy little business. So I didn't, a lot of people in the forces, sometimes they come out into the sort of civilian world, and it can for some be a struggle to find something that occupies their time or gives them, motivation and so on. I didn't have that problem at all. I was stuck straight into it, and kind of setting up a business and running it. It really, for me, satisfied sounds a bit odd, but it satisfied quite a creative urge. You've got to be constantly thinking about how do I achieve this? What's the solution for that? How am I going to create a marketing strategy for such and such, or what computer system am I going to use to manage all my workflow and clients and accounting and all that sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed doing all that stuff. But it got to a stage really where I got worn out. They talk about burnout and all that sort of stuff. I'm not sure if I actually got burnt out at all, but I certainly got to the stage where I thought I can't maintain this for much longer. I'm going to have to do something else. So 2020, 7 years after starting that business, we're in lockdown, and my staff are all working from home, and that was all working out quite nicely actually. And I was scrolling through Facebook, and I saw an advert for the National Police Air Service, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I looked at the qualifications that was needed, and I had them all. You needed a commercial pilot's license, which I had, because when I left the Navy are very, very good at sort of giving you what they call resettlement training and giving you grants and funding to get civilian qualifications. So as part of that process, I got my commercial pilot's license, brackets, a helicopter. Anyway, so I got the job. So I thought, blimey, and this is like, this is what I'd applied sort of almost on a bit of a whim, just that, well, let's just do it. It's an online form. Let's just do this and see what happens. Got a job offer, and then I was like, oh shucks, I better actually go and get all my paperwork, because they're going to want to see that, license and medical. But of course, it was lockdown, so there were you couldn't get medical, for love nor money, because everywhere was like closed, and the thought of it, whatever. So I was cutting it really fine with the deadline to submit my paperwork or something to sort of show and it all became very stressful in the end. I was thinking, oh my God, I almost wish I hadn't done this. But anyway, in the end, as it happened, got it sorted, got all my paperwork squared away, and joined the National Police Air Service in July 2020. All right. Having rapidly had to make some plans for my business, which was employing people. Luckily, Nick Kitson, shout out to her. She's great. She's my senior manager, and she basically took on the business and became a registered business partner and business owner with me, which is great. So she now runs that side of things, and I'm now back flying with the police.
Fantastic.
Which is great.
So let's move on to the police then. Do you,
Yeah.
was it, I think I put my question was it a piece of piss after joining?
Was it a piece of piss?
I mean,
Fun. Yeah.
what sort of person?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, go on. It's really interesting because I felt I had not flown although it'd been 7 years since I'd left the Navy, I had actually carried on flying with the Navy as a reservist. That's another story. I'll just end up talking even more about that. But basically, I was a reservist with the Navy after I left the Navy, so I managed to carry on flying for a little bit. So that meant when I joined the police, it had been 5 years since I'd flown a helicopter, actual hands-on controls. So I was a little bit daunted, and I went off, did 2 weeks of ground school, learning to fly the EC-145. So the police have got a fairly generic, kind of fairly standard helicopter. After the Lynx, a fairly straightforward aircraft, actually better in some respects. We were talking earlier about an autopilot. It got better systems, much more modern aircraft, more modern avionics, autopilot, GPS, integrated GPS navigation systems and so on, which is all pretty bread and butter really for a modern helicopter these days. But actually the Lynx was quite an old aircraft. So for me, it represented a nice upgrade. And then once I'd done the 2 weeks of ground school, then on to flying the aircraft, which was only around about 12 hours or so of flying, and then to qualify on the aircraft. And then into what we call line training, and that's sort of flying the aircraft with another police pilot to then get to grips with the actual role. How do we position the aircraft to follow a vehicle? How do we position the aircraft to search for a missing person on Dartmoor? So all that sort of stuff. So was the flying, was it a piece of piss? Actually, flying the aircraft, I was really surprised. It came back really quickly and very easily. I surprised myself in a really nice way, and didn't feel too uncomfortable with that. The line training was then over pretty quickly as well. So after probably less than 20 hours flying, I was doing this job of flying a police helicopter, doing on pursuits and missing persons and all that sort of stuff. And I totally felt like an imposter. So although the flying was simple, the fact that I'd been out of flying it wasn't simple. It was far from simple. But although the process of getting back into flying the aircraft felt fairly straightforward, I felt like a complete imposter for quite some time.
Really?
It's like, what am I doing? A few weeks ago, I was introducing tenants into a new home and signing, boring tenancy contracts. How on earth have I somehow managed to end up in a police helicopter at like 2:00 in the morning on night vision goggles, pursuing cars down the M5? It's like weird. It was really strange. So it was getting back into flying was fairly easy. Actually properly getting to grips with the role and learning about police flying took quite some time. And the big difference is with the Navy, you're flying as part of a squadron or as part of a ship. There's a whole load of other people supporting you. When we were flying from the Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton, which is the main air station here in Somerset, there are several squadrons flying. There's several aircraft airborne at the same time. Air traffic control are on the radio to you pretty much all the time, and so on. There's a big support organisation helping you basically with whatever it is that you're doing. With the police in Devon and Cornwall, where I cover, actually there's not much of that at all. There's one aircraft and me and two police officers, and all that support is not really there. It's down to me to make the correct decisions and judgments on things like weather, which is a big limiting factor, especially in the winter around Devon, Cornwall. We've got a lot of terrain, Dartmoor, Bodmin Moor, Exmoor. So there's lots of that sort of thing to negotiate. Not only is the terrain actually an obstacle, but it creates its own weather and clouds. So you might have nights where the weather's okay, but you go somewhere and think, oh, shucks, actually there's a little microclimate type thing here, which is creating weather, which is a problem, and so on. So you start having to learn your environment and learn your patch, so to speak. And that took quite some time, actually. And it was a challenge because there were not many other people to learn from. There were people you could get advice from, but a lot of it was just hands-on experience, just getting stuck in and doing it. So yeah, but great fun.
Are you a member of the police force, or are you a pilot for them?
So Generally speaking, the pilots are police staff, so we're not policemen or police women or police officers. We're police staff, and then the crew are police officers.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's the crew, as in the people who
in the aircraft with me.
Okay.
Yeah. So the aircraft is flown with one pilot and two police officers. The police officers will be trained to operate what we call our roll equipment. So the camera, infrared camera,
I see,
and also mapping systems and so on. So typical role would be, I mentioned sort of vehicle pursuits. Actually, those for us in the Southwest are relatively rare. A majority of stuff that we're doing is missing persons. So this will be suicidal people that have written a note, for example, said, right, I'm going to go and top myself. And it is sad, but there is a lot of that stuff that we are doing at the moment. It might also be, dementia sufferers. It might be young people who got confused or whatever. So missing people and trying to find them is a lot of our work. Generally speaking, there'll be some kind of evidence or intelligence that suggests someone is going to be in a particular location on a particular set of cliffs, for example, or in a forest or in a field, wherever it might be. My job will be to get the aircraft there and do the navigation and weather planning and all that sort of stuff to get there. And then generally speaking, I orbit the aircraft so that the two officers in the aircraft can then use the camera and the equipment to then search the ground is pretty much what they're doing. And obviously that's a specialist role for them. It's not any old police officer. They're specialists in that role.
So you're not gonna get out and you haven't been issued with a truncheon and
No, unfortunately not. No. Technically, the guys on the ground can do that. I've only ever once had to land and for the police officer to get out and actually gather evidence and do some actual bobbying, so to speak.
Right.
That was only ever once. Normally, you're working with units on the ground, and you would talk units on the ground, police cars on the ground, into to do that kind of stuff.
Amazing. So that was going to be my question. You don't land generally. You would be.
We do a little bit, yeah.
Okay.
So perhaps best examples. Last year I think it's around about March, April time last year. There was a team of kids school party on Dartmoor. They were doing some tent training for 10 tours. 10 tours is that sort of 2-day walking expedition for youth groups on Dartmoor. They were doing a training exercise for that, and some kid had started getting hypothermia, but they were on some high ground, and cloud had come in, and they couldn't. This is with their guide as well, with their teachers. They didn't know where they were and what to do. So they called us in. And actually, we struggled to get to them because of the cloud, but then we had a second attempt and managed to find them, land on, and took that young lad who had hypothermia, just took him off the moor. So that's an example of why we might land. Sometimes we might need to land to actually talk with police officers on the ground and just get a brief from them. The search coordinators, for example, if it's a missing person scenario that might have been going on for it might even be going on for several days, actually. Sometimes we need to land on and get a brief with them. It might even be that we take them flying so they can get an understanding of the terrain that they've got to manage and coordinate. So we do land, but I would say we routinely land, but we don't frequently land. So probably once or twice a month I might land.
So, you were a Royal Navy helicopter instructor.
Yes.
And so becoming a police, are other police helicopter pilots of a similar caliber, or are you way out there in terms of...
No, not at all. All very similar. The entry requirements to get into the police are, you're not really going to satisfy them unless you've got military background, because they want a minimum of 1,500 flying hours, which in the big grand scheme of things is not a huge amount, but for perhaps a non-military pilot to have consistently got those hours might be a bit of an ask, but they certainly won't have NVG, night vision goggle experience, which we use in the police as well. So you're only really going to get that from a military background. They also want pilots who are experienced in low flying as well. Again, you're only really going to get that with a military background. So the police is very much ex-military pilots. There are a few who are not ex-military, but actually even those ones probably went through military flying training, but then got chopped out of it and then went into civilian flying, and then sort of further on down the line went into the police. So no, at Exeter, I work with another one of my colleagues is another Navy pilot. One of them is also an Air Force pilot, ex-Chinook pilot. At other bases around the country is a lot of Army Air Corps guys. So yeah, it's mainly military.
In terms of job sort of satisfaction, comparing the Navy and the police, to be very crude and probably overly reductive, the in the Navy you were preparing to sort of attack things, other things, but it's a military thing, it's an aggressive thing. Whereas here you're saving people, or how does talk about that?
That's a great question, because it's the crux. It really is, for me, the crux of the difference between the two. As you probably guessed from this chat today, I loved my time in the Navy, but it was all, so much of it was all training. It was all pretend, and I loved instructing, teaching people to fly. But then also when we did some of the training that was sort of tactical training, and we would fly from Yeovilton out to the south coast, out into Lyme Bay and beyond, and we would then be in a pretend scenario. So we would look for like a just any old ship that was merchant ship, fishing vessel, whatever. We'd find that on the radar, and then we would pretend that is the enemy, and then we would do some pretend attack profiles. We'd do some pretend approaches as if we were going to land on it or whatever, and everything was pretend, and that's fine. The Armed Forces train a lot. That's one of our, in the UK, one of our specialist areas really, is that we put a lot of focus and emphasis on training. But after a while that gets boring, because there's no real purpose behind it. As soon as I joined the police, every time we fly, it's for a real purpose. Sometimes you're looking for a missing person and we know they're not there, but at least we're getting airborne to at least rule that out, that factor. But it was a real eye opener for me how that difference really made a big impact on me in terms of job satisfaction. I really enjoy the police flying because it's real, and you're there to help people ultimately.
Yeah, amazing. So can you tell us any particularly, maybe you can't, I don't know. Can you tell us any interesting stories of cases of things that have happened? Yes,
generally speaking. I mean, probably start with about a mix of what we do. So probably 80% of what we do is actually missing people. So as I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of that is mental health related and so on. And people go missing for whatever reason, and we need to find them because their life is in danger. They need help and support. And in Devon and Cornwall, big, vast, remote areas, it's quite easy for people to get lost and go. So the helicopter's perfect tool for finding those people. So we do a lot of that sort of work. The other work that we do might be firearms support. So there might be armed response officers want to, for example, surround a building because someone in that building is threatening people with a knife or a gun. So that then requires a full response, and they want an aircraft overhead to provide cover and video and recording for that side of things. So we do a fair bit of that, and then also probably the most exciting stuff is what we do least of out in the southwest is the vehicle pursuits. And even then, the majority of the vehicle pursuits are controlled in the sense that the vehicle we're following doesn't know that they're being followed. So it's not a vehicle that's failed to stop. It's it's a vehicle it's doing a county lines drug run down the M5. It hits a camera, so we know where it is. That then activates a response, and then we have the follow, and then what's known as a TPAC unit. This is the vehicles on the road that will pull it over and stop it. So that's kind of the mix of stuff that we do. In terms of the most memorable stuff, difficult to say. I had a couple. I had one early on. I had one pursuit where the vehicle did fail to stop. It was in a car park, It had been boxed in badly by some police cars. It barged its way through. Its bumper got half ripped off. It then got back onto the motorway and was sort of driving down the motorway with its bumper hanging off and going in and out of cars and all that sort of stuff. So that was quite exciting. And then when they eventually pulled it over, the driver did try and leg it over the embankment and that sort of thing. And then there was another one a while back where we had a vehicle in a city. It gone down it would fail to stop. It had gone down a cul-de-sac and had nowhere to go. So you thought, well, that's it. It's game over. It's going to get boxed in. It just decided to reverse its way out of the cul-de-sac and ram everything that it could out of the way.
God.
So there's a few bits and pieces like that. But I think probably a difficult question to answer because so much of this stuff is happening so often. That was the real eye-opener. There is this stuff is happening, missing people, vehicles, crime, all that sort of stuff. It's happening so often that you're going out to it most days and you become a little bit sort of not blasé about it, but it's difficult to have one incident that sticks out in your mind. And you think, that was, sadly, actually the stuff that is most memorable is the stuff that's most tragic. I mean, we had one. We've had cases of people who have accidentally fallen over cliffs, for example. That wasn't a suicide thing at all. But they've gone missing, and oh shucks, we found them at the bottom of cliffs and that sort of thing. So it's, that actually is probably the most memorable stuff for all the wrong reasons.
Has it made you feel a bit different about crime and so on? Do you lock your doors more securely now? Must be hard to keep a balance if you're dealing with it all day. To think that,
I think so. But I mean, I just take my hats off to the police officers because they've come from, as response officers on the ground. They then come into NPAS and they tell me the stories of the things that they've got involved in. And it's serious stuff in terms of death. How many different ways can someone die violently? They've seen it. And we think about PTSD and that sort of thing for our military personnel. Actually, a lot of the police are being exposed to that sort of stuff day in, day out. And I would say that actually the support for them is not quite where it should be. Actually, that's not a criticism. That's just a thought. Really.
Yeah. I've just been reading a book at the moment. It's called A Long Stretch. It's about a guy who went to prison. And he makes the same point about the prison officers. They've all got some sort of, PTSD and so on from all the things that they have to deal with every day.
Yeah. And unfortunately as well, I mean, all the police that I've dealt with, they're all really want to help. They're motivated and they want to do the best that they can. Resources are not great. Tech to support them is my big observation. There's not enough systems, navigation systems, communication systems to actually help police officers get to where they need to be quickly and efficiently. A lot of the time we're talking guys on the ground to a location and it's like, no, go ahead a little bit, right? No, stop there. No, turn left a little bit. Really, in this day and age, we should just be able to get on an iPad and go, it's there. And, actually they have the same, same system on the ground and they can work effectively, but they don't have that, So some of those sorts of things can be really frustrating and obstructive to officers who otherwise want to do the best job that they can.
Yeah. I've got a question here. If you were the interviewer and you were interviewing a police helicopter pilot, maybe one who'd also been in the Navy for a podcast, what questions would you ask? What have I not asked? That's a good question.
It's a very good question. I thought, how would I answer? And I put myself. If I was to actually meet another police helicopter pilot from, say, another country, I would be asking them, what sort of crime do they get involved in? I'd be interested to know about what aircraft they fly. I'd be interested to know what equipment that they have, and how effective it is, and so on. I would be asking technical questions about gear, which would be probably outside the scope of the normal listener's attention or interest.
Okay, all right. I don't want to be depressing, but I'm very old, and you're not. You're not doing much better. What is there a cut off where you have to start thinking about? There's a limit to what pilots are allowed to do.
Yeah, there is. So at the age of 60, I I mean, I'm 48 now, so
long,
I've
long
still
way
got
away.
Potentially, yeah, I've still got 12 years if I wanted to. At the age of 60 is when you can no longer fly single pilot anymore. You would have to be twin pilot, so two pilots operating the aircraft. And obviously the police role is not twin pilot, it's single pilot. So 60 years old would be my cutoff. Do I want to go that far? Probably not. I do enjoy flying. I enjoy the work, but there are definitely other things that I would like to do. I kind of got back into flying because I liked the look of this job with the police. It was the job that attracted me, not going back into flying per se. So, once I've had my fill of the police, and the model for police aviation might change in the next 2 or 3 years. Lots of things happening. Our aircraft are quite old, so they need to be replaced. Drones are becoming much more useful to the police in some areas as well. So that's now taking up some of the work that the police would have once done with helicopters. So the way the aircraft are going to operate in the future might change. So that might mean a change in the number of pilots or the location of pilots. So, it's a good chance that it might not suit me in the future. I don't know. I certainly, for the time being, I want to carry on doing what I'm doing because I definitely enjoy it very much. But I'm also very open to the idea that it might stop, in which case, fine, I'll do something else.
So what tips, final question maybe, what tips would you give to someone interested in becoming a helicopter pilot?
Certainly going down the military route, probably the most challenging aspect is just getting in, I think, getting the selection. So if you're young, if you're sort of, a teenager, I think just do all that you can to prepare yourself and develop yourself. Obviously, if you can get some hands-on flying, then fine, but don't sweat about that. You're going to get all of that training further on down the line. Much more important to build your own knowledge and skill set so that when you can do an interview, you can talk confidently. You've got something about you. You've got education. You've got sports. You've got hobbies. You know a bit about news and current affairs because you'll be asked all of that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is, in terms of sort of developing yourself, get involved with other people. You are going to have to be able to work with other people as a team. So it might be doing stuff at school, doing stuff with the cadets, doing stuff in a youth group. Just be gregarious and get involved because that's what you're going to need at a selection process, definitely. I used to do something when I was in the Navy, occasionally would help out with potential officers. So this is like a thing that the careers offices would run for 14, 15, 16-year-olds. They would spend a day at Yeovilton seeing different units. And you could just tell the people who were going to do well at an interview and the ones that weren't, because there'd be the young man, young lady who'd be asking questions, they'd be engaged, they'd be interested, they could interact with people, and then there'd be the shy, awkward person who didn't say anything. And it's a shame because it's not a criticism of them, but it's just that kind of manner doesn't bode well for an organisation that wants active, engaged people.
Yeah.
So prepare and develop yourself.
Are you ready, Agatha?
If you are, Ethel.
This is no laughing matter, of course. Stop it, Naval. We're all mature adults. Thank you and good night.
I wanted to just ask about what was it like the first time you ever flew when you were a solo?
Yeah, great. I remember it well. I learned to fly on an aircraft called the Piper PA-28, which is a light, quite an old type of aircraft now, probably dating from the 60s, if not possibly earlier, I'm not sure. Light aircraft, single engine, and I learned to fly that at Kidlington. My instructor was a guy called Pete Thorne, who was an ex-Air Force pilot from the 1950s. He was a proper old boy, old school, Air Force guy. And
handlebar moustache?
not far off. Not he didn't, but some of the instructors on that course there was one particular guy who definitely had the handlebar moustache, actually. So yeah, learned to fly that, and we did 30 hours, and after about 10 or 11 hours, you do your first solo. So the first 10 hours, it's all mostly circuits. You're in the circuit at the airfield, and a circuit is just a predefined pattern, as the name suggests, pretty much a rectangular circuit pattern based around the runway, and the purpose of the circuit is to organise traffic, organise aircraft into a sort of an organised way to approach and land. So you'd practice circuits, certain speeds, certain heights, and so on. And then after about 10 hours, you do your first solo, which would be one circuit. So you'd have done half an hour or 45 minutes of circuits with the instructor. He'd land, you'd taxi back, and normally you didn't know, it would be a surprise, but you knew roughly it was coming around about the 10 to 12 hour mark. So he'd get out and he'd say, right, you stay there, don't shut down, you stay strapped in, right, I want you to go and do your first solo. So the deal is you circuit, do taxi out, do one circuit, land, come back here, and they would, you adopted a special call sign, I can't remember what it was, so the air traffic control then knew it was a first solo type of flight and that sort of stuff. So tremendously exciting, but I remember I couldn't believe it. All my circuits had been flawless with no real issue. Well, flawless, they weren't. That's absolute nonsense. They had been uneventful, is what I meant to say. And then I got airborne, and I was like, yes, can't believe it, amazing, flying this airplane on my own. And got to the end of what's known as the downwind leg, just before you turn to then turn back in towards the runway onto your approach landing direction. And as I turned, there was another aircraft, more advanced aircraft, twin engine thing, professional pilot, who was making what's known as a straight in approach. So he wasn't doing the circuit. He was just coming straight to the runway from 10 miles away or whatever. And if I had the experience of the capacity, I probably would have known that by listening in on the radio, but I didn't spot that at all. So as I turned finals, there's this other aircraft turning right in front of me. And
Yikes.
We would miss. That was fine. It wasn't really a collision issue, but the fact was he would be on the runway at the time that, he would still be on the runway at the point that I would need to land, which you can't do. Only have one aircraft on the runway at any one time. So I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to overshoot and basically do a second circuit, which wasn't the plan. And I can't remember. I think I then did exactly that. So I got all worried that I basically hadn't done what was briefed and all that sort of stuff. And I was worried that I would upset the other pilot, and I worried that I'd somehow, all these panics, ideas went through my mind. And of course it was all fine in the end. But I remember that on my first solo. Yeah.
I keep saying one final question, I promise.
It's
last
fine.
30 years ago or more.
Yeah.
In Blisworth, a helicopter. You managed to land in our grandparents' garden. Could you tell us about that?
Well, I remember that one very clearly. So I had long kind of had this idea of going and landing in the garden or in the field next door, because Nanny and Popper had a very rural kind of garden with farmers' fields, surrounding it. So I thought that would be good fun to go and do. And, it was a bit of a hot topic, actually, to go and do that sort of thing, because the press were getting hold of these stories where the military were going off and landing somewhere and having fun. And it was seen as a jolly and a waste of taxpayers' money and all that sort of stuff. But actually, there is a perfectly genuinely legitimate way of justifying it. You had to practice in navigation. You have to practice landing in fields.
Yeah.
Actually going and landing in a field at my grandparents' house was perfectly justified.
Yeah.
So there was an afternoon where I knew that I was instructing at the time, and I knew it was going to be a quiet afternoon on the squadron for whatever reason. I'd planned it ahead, and I thought, and I'd also got Jane, one of the observers who I was pals with. I joined up with her. I said, should we plan a navigation sortie to my grandparents' place? And so we did that. But the engineers, because it was a quiet afternoon, the engineers didn't want the aircraft to go, because from their point, these things go, bear in mind, these old aircraft are going unserviceable all the time, and they need an engineering check every sort of 6 hours, and then a deeper check every 12 hours, and blah, 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 blah. They didn't want the aircraft to go, because basically if the aircraft went, it was more of a burden on them at the end of the day in terms of doing the servicing and all that sort of stuff. And so the engineers were not happy, but I got the flight authorized, and we got into the aircraft, and the very basic navigation system that we had in there wasn't working. It was a very basic computer with a very old style green digital, sort of like an old digital calculator type of display on there. It was that system for putting in lats and longs, latitudes, longitudes of waypoints, and it wasn't working. And Jane and I just looked at each other and said, so it's a nice day. We've got a map and a stopwatch. We can navigate the aircraft old style. We don't actually need that. And so we just chinned that off, and off we went to Nanny and Poppers, and landed there, had a lovely afternoon showing. It became a bit of a family occasion. Next door neighbours came out to look as well, and then it even got into the local news as well. Some local photographer got hold of the story. So it was good fun, and it was really nice as well to show my nan the aircraft, because I think all that sort of stuff is just a world away from her, really.
Where would you come from? Where were you based then?
So we're based at Yeovilton, which is in Somerset. So we
come a long way to Northampton.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's about 50 minutes, I suppose. I mean, but then when we got back to Yeovilton, though, we said, "Oh, by the way, the navigation system's not working," and then an engineer went out and lo and behold, fixed it very quickly with popping a circuit breaker back in. So the cheeky engineers were absolutely convinced they'd pull the circuit breaker, thinking that we would get in the aircraft and go, "Oh no, well, the navigation system's broken, we can't go." So the engineers didn't get their way.
I'll say, Chris, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. Amazing story. And thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.